I have been immersed in intersex communities for about half my life, so over 15 years as a person with that experience growing up in communities with multiple generations of intersex activists, but then serving as communications director for Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth, which is the largest in the US and probably overall law and policy organization on behalf of intersex issues. And I worked to pass legislation in California regarding genital surgeries performed on intersex infants. I'm also an educator with a YouTube channel. I speak at medical schools, and I'm, in general, an educator, author. My literary debut around these topics is also coming out shortly.
That's great. Maybe it would be helpful to give the folks watching this just a brief definition of what it means to be intersex, the varieties of anatomical diversity that exists in all of us.
Sure. Intersex people are born with or develop around puberty differences in their anatomical and reproductive anatomy. So, intersex people often have measurable, observable variations in how their bodies are developing. So, that could be differences in the appearance and structure of genitalia. That could be differences in like your puberty, what type of hormones you express and how you react to that, as well as differences in internal reproductive anatomy.
You have this excellent video on YouTube where you talk about juice as a way of describing the pathways that this can happen. It's just, I find it so approachable. Could you describe that a little?
Sure. So I sometimes jokingly call hormones juice. It's something that, trans and intersex people both rely on pharmaceutical hormone care often.
Mhm.
And intersex people have different relationships to hormones. So some intersex people are born without gonads or have their gonads taken from them against their consent. And so you might need to rely on this sort of external juice, being estrogen or testosterone pharmaceuticals. But I use the metaphor of juice to talk about different hormone expressions in the body.
It's a really great video. Tell me a bit about where things are with some of the advocacy work that you're doing. What's happening?
hmm Well, often we're talking about core issues around bodily autonomy in the medical space. So, infant genital surgeries, when someone is born with differences that maybe look unusual or look unusual to providers, maybe look different than the statistical norm. And so we deal a lot with infant surgeries, things that have to do with the shape, function of genitalia that aren't related to being life-saving. So that's been a core issue for many decades around bodily autonomy, right? And that's pretty
Yeah.
foundational. And it's sometimes hard to focus on other issues when there's such deep violations of autonomy that are happening so young, such deep violations. So that often tends to be what's foregrounded and for good reason. But it also goes a lot deeper than that, right? There's a lot of other ways in which there's discrimination, there's difficulties accessing healthcare, especially around some of the uniqueness of the needs that we talked about.
What are
Mhm.
some of the most common misconceptions that you've noticed in conversations with medical providers?
A lot of the arguments that I hear are very much around confusion about gender diversity and what that means
Mhm.
and what a person might want for their body. So things like if an intersex person has these parts, then we know that they want this surgery, or we know that they want this, and so we should be able to do this, and you can't legislate that away. And so I think a lot of those misconceptions are just very rooted in practice and in the culture of the industry. When I've done education with students, it feels a little bit different. And in those spaces, the misconceptions are different. Younger people, medical students being like, oh, wait, that still happens? Or like, does that happen here? When every
Yeah.
time that I've spoken at a medical school, if there's any sort of publicly available urology curriculum, I can usually dig and find something immediately around like, oh no, yeah, this is absolutely like
Hmm.
absolutely happening by you guys. And I think the last misconception is maybe that medical students might think that there's not much they can do or that there's sort of a disempowerment there sometimes because
Hmm.
of medicine being such an industry with the hierarchy and the culture that it has. But I have witnessed medical students do incredible projects and band together to work towards changing curriculum and creating groups, even in the subspecialties that are averse to hearing arguments in favor of autonomy.